This video will tell a story 28 years and some months long, a time which saw scandal and suit, robots and Republicans, and which ultimately brings us to where we are right now. It begins in the year 1980, but first we need a little context. There were numerous shifts in power and many strides made towards the good stuff: environmental protections, equal rights, and better accessible technology. We saw the creation of a public broadcasting system and the Environmental Protection Agency in 1970, the founding of Microsoft in 75, and the first home computer available for sale in 77. In Roe v. Wade, the U.S. Supreme Court granted women reproductive rights and privacy protections under the 14th Amendment, stirring the political pot for years to come. In these previous years, we as a nation celebrate the first Earth Day. We grappled with Watergate and ratified the 26th Amendment, concluding that if a person is old enough to go to war, then he ought to be old enough to vote. We watched, for the first time in history, a president resign, and it changed the way we saw government altogether. And from that period, like any other, there are things that this nation can never forget. Amongst all of this, there is something else brewing in the underground politics. It's 1980 and Ronald Reagan wants to make America great again. So he launches an election that promises tax reduction, tighten eligibility for food stamps, and prayer in schools. This marks the beginning of new conservatism. In November, Reagan destroyed his Democratic competition with 429 electoral votes and more than half of the popular vote. One of many promises found in the 1980 Republican platform was a genuine commitment to equal rights for women. While the entire Republican base aggressively opposed basic autonomy and reproductive rights for women, we should acknowledge that it was because of Reagan that a woman was put onto the United States Supreme Court as early as 1981, only 192 years after it was established. Indeed, one of the first actions taken by Reagan was to nominate Sandra Day O'Connor for a spot on the Supreme Court. The greatest concern highlighted during her 3-day Senate hearing was abortion, a subject on which she wisely refused to comment explicitly. On September 21st, O'Connor was confirmed by the U.S. Senate by a vote of 99-0. One person was absent. And she entered the United States Supreme Court as the first female justice. This was an important step in the right direction for American women everywhere. Gender equality was just one of many goals of the new conservative breed, though. In the 1980 platform, as well as the 1984 and 1988 platforms, the revived Republican movement vowed to reinstate a federal death penalty. They succeeded in this endeavor with the federal execution reinstated in 1988. Moreover, the Republican platform also began to formally encourage enrollment of young children in pre-kindergarten and kindergarten programs. Data published by the U.S. Department of Education shows a steady increase of both general and full-day enrollment in these programs beginning in the late 1970s. Finally, as part of their Drug-Free America campaign, which was launched in the late 1980s, the New Conservatives encouraged states to suspend eligibility for driver's license to anyone convicted of a drug offense in an attempt to prevent young Americans from experimenting with or using drugs. This proved temporarily effective, but in the long term had little to no effectually positive outcome. One of the pillars of these Republican platforms that ultimately composed the foundations of new conservatism was a dedication to what was nominally recognized as traditional family values. When broken down and understood practically, these so-called morals discriminate against LGBT persons, villainize and stigmatize all forms of sexual activity or expression, and generally function in a sexist manner. For instance, again and again the Republican platform explicitly expresses intention to create barriers between teens and access to information, contraceptive, or abortive medicines. The idea was to limit teen pregnancy. One of the subsets of restrictions on sexual health care is the requirement of parental consent for emancipated minors seeking contraceptives from federally funded clinics like Planned Parenthood. Another is express support for programs like the Adolescent Family Life Program, which teaches the so-called traditional values and advocates strictly for abstinence. However, after a steady declining rate of teen pregnancies amongst females aged 15 to 19 following 1969, The rate of teen pregnancy begins to rise in 1988 and then peaks for the first time in nearly 20 years. According to the Pew Research Center and Child Trends, the nation's leading nonprofit research organization focused exclusively on improving the lives and prospects of children, youth, and their families. Yet another pillar of the new conservative movement is the oppression of queer Americans. The signing of Don't Ask, Don't Tell into law by Bill Clinton in 1994 signifies a party which does not view gay and lesbian Americans as full citizens despite their service for our nation. The DADT made any person who was openly gay or lesbian ineligible for military service. As a result, dozens of queer servicemen and women lost what was an enormous part of their identity as they were discharged dishonorably. Despite supposed adherence to strict evangelical values, issues of adultery arose in the White House not long after the initial plight of this new movement. Bill Clinton aggressively denied allegations of sexual assault and affairs, despite these rumors ultimately proving true. This drastically affected the view of executive bodies held by everyday Americans.